I want you to just picture your morning commute for a second.
Okay.
You're driving to work, maybe you're grabbing a coffee, and you pass that familiar spot, under the overpass or near the park.
You see the tents.
You see the tents, you see the shopping carts piled high with plastic bags. And what's the first thought that, goes through your head?
Is it, how do we fix this?
Or is it something more resigned? Like, well, that's just how it is.
Or, and this is the really uncomfortable question we're tackling today, is your thought actually, thank God that isn't me?
Right. Exactly. Today, we are unpacking a source that is going to fundamentally challenge how you look at those tents.
It's a piece titled The Business of Keeping People Homeless in America.
And it suggests something pretty terrifying. It argues that homelessness isn't a problem we can't solve.
It's a business model we have chosen not to end.
That is a massive claim.
It is. I mean, we're used to hearing about homelessness as, a policy failure, a mental health crisis, or a housing supply issue.
Sure, all of the above.
But this source takes a much colder, harder look at the economics and, well, the psychology behind it.
Yeah.
It argues the system isn't broken.
It's working exactly as intended.
Exactly.
Working as intended. I mean, that's a phrase that usually implies efficiency, success. But here we're talking about human misery.
We are. But we are also talking about money.
Yeah.
A lot of money.
Okay.
So to set the stage here, the source points out that the United States spends tens of billions of dollars annually on homelessness.
Tens of billions.
Annually.
That's a staggering amount of cash. I mean, if you threw tens of billions of dollars at a pothole problem, you'd expect smooth roads, right?
You'd hope so.
But if you look around any major U.S. city, Los Angeles, New York, Seattle, does it look like $10 billion worth of progress is happening?
The source argues the complete opposite. The visual evidence suggests it's getting worse.
Yeah.
More tents, more despair, more visibility.
Yeah.
So the core mission of this deep dive is to really figure out where that disconnect is coming from.
Right. Why does the richest country in the history of the world rely on expired food banks and, plastic tarps instead of actual systemic solutions?
We're going to get to the homelessness industry in a bit.
The idea that people are actually profiting from this.
Yes, but I want to start with the part of the source that, like you, really got under my skin. The why, not the financial why.
The psychological why.
The psychological why. The source introduces this deterrent theory.
This is, I think, the most provocative part of the whole argument.
I would agree. It moves beyond just bureaucracy and suggests that homelessness serves a functional purpose for the economy.
A tool for social control.
That's the phrase.
When you say social control, it sounds a little dystopian, like something out of a sci-fi novel.
It does, but let's strip away the emotion for a second and just look at the labor mechanics the source describes.
Okay.
The argument is that if you actually eradicated homelessness, if the safety net was truly robust, if losing your job still meant you had a warm, safe place to live,
you would lose the ultimate stick.
The ultimate stick used to beat the American worker into submission. Yes.
The fear of ending up on the street.
Exactly. The source paints this really vivid portrait of the average worker. Think about the guy who gets up at 5 a.m. every single morning.
Hates his commute,
goes to a job that maybe breaks his body or just numbs his mind. He's been doing it for 22 years.
And he's staring down the barrel of doing it for 20 more.
Right. And why does he do it? Why does he tolerate stagnant wages or bad management or unsafe conditions?
It's because he's terrified.
The source argues it's because he is terrified. On his drive to work, he passes the encampments. He sees the reality of the alternative.
Yes, it's a visual warning.
It's a billboard.
Yeah?
A giant human billboard that says, if you stop grinding, if you step out of line, if you demand too much, this is where you land.
Wow.
The source argues that the misery of the homeless is essentially weaponized to ensure compliance from the rest of the working class. It keeps the hamster wheel spinning.
That's incredibly dark. It implies that the person freezing in the alleyway is, in a way, doing a job for the economy just by being there.
They're the scarecrow.
The scarecrow. And if you remove the scarecrow,
the fear evaporates. If the worst-case scenario isn't sleeping on wet pavement, maybe that worker demands a raise. Maybe they quit that toxic job. The source argues that the powers that be, the people benefiting from cheap, compliant labor, they simply cannot afford to lose that visual deterrent.
It completely reframes the housing first debate. It's not just about cost anymore, it's about leverage.
Exactly.
But speaking of cost, we have to talk about where the money is actually going.
Yeah.
Because if we're spending billions and it's not solving the problem, who's getting paid?
And this brings us to what the source calls the homelessness industrial complex.
We've all heard about the military-industrial complex, but applying that framework to, charity and social services, that feels cynical.
It is cynical, but the source demands we look at the incentives. We have built an entire ecosystem around managing homelessness.
Right.
There are huge nonprofit organizations, government departments, administrative bodies, consulting firms. Their entire existence depends on this crisis continuing.
And the operative word there is managing, not solving.
Huge difference. If you are in the business of solving a problem, your ultimate goal is to put yourself out of business.
Right. You cure the disease, you don't need the treatment anymore.
But the source argues these organizations are incentivized to maintain the problem.
Because if the problem goes away, the grant money stops. The funding dries up.
The grants stop, the payroll stops, the conferences stop. It's a totally perverse incentive structure.
So the system naturally gravitates towards what the source calls maintenance.
Yeah, maintenance. You hand out blankets once a year. You organize a food drive. You hold endless consultations and write strategic plans.
It looks like work. It feels like work.
It is work. But it's work that sustains the bureaucracy, not work that houses people.
The source literally calls it a business of keeping people homeless. Because if you actually took that money and just built housing,
The consultants wouldn't have anyone to consult for.
there is no money in the cure, only in the treatment. It's terrifying to hear that applied to human suffering.
And the source grounds this in a really specific cultural memory to show just how long this management phase has been going on.
The Phil Collins moment.
Yep.
Yeah. This part really struck a chord with me because I remember this song so vividly.
Another Day in Paradise.
Right. So the narrator of our source material talks about being 9 years old. This is decades ago.
Mm.
Riding in the car with their mom on the way to school, and this song comes on the radio. And even at 9, listening to those lyrics, about a woman calling out to a man on the street who ignores her, the kid got it.
It's a very direct song. There's no ambiguity.
No. But the tragedy the source points out isn't the song itself. It's the realization the narrator has now as an adult.
Looking back
At that memory 30 years ago and realizing that absolutely nothing has changed.
it's the concept of generational stasis.
Yes.
Think about how much the world has changed in 30 years. I mean, the internet, smartphones, medical breakthroughs, the stock market exploding.
Unfathomable amounts of wealth.
And yet, if you look at the bottom rung of the ladder, it looks exactly the same as it did when Phil Collins wrote that song.
Actually, the source argues it might look worse.
It does. And to prove that, the source zooms in from the macro history to a very specific, visceral moment the author experienced recently. It describes driving past a man in an alleyway.
This description, I want to pause here because it's gruesome in a very quiet way.
It is. The scene is set against a vacant building. It's barely 40 degrees outside.
Cold enough that you hurt if you weren't moving.
And there's a man sitting there, just motionless.
And the detail about the blanket.
He has a blanket, but it's too small. It covers his head and his torso, but his legs are completely exposed to the freezing air.
Oh, man.
And the source describes seeing the man's breath, just these little puffs of steam coming out from under the blanket.
It's a rhythmic sign of life in a tableau that looks like death.
And that image, that breath in the cold air, is what grounds the whole industry critique. I mean, we can talk about budget allocations and strategic committees all day.
Right.
But the reality of those billions of dollars is a man freezing on wet pavement while traffic just drives by. The source asks a very simple question. How have we normalized this?
How do we drive past that and just carry on with our day?
Exactly.
Little Johnny made his choice, right? That's the line the source uses.
That's the psychological conditioning. To tolerate that level of visible suffering in a wealthy society, you have to build a defense mechanism.
You have to blame the victim.
You have to. The source is pretty sarcastic about it.
Little Johnny made his choice. Now let's go get your $6 peppermint mocha frappuccino.
It's biting, but it's accurate to the internal monologue many people have. We tell ourselves, oh, they're drug addicts, or they prefer the street, or they made bad choices.
Because if we admit this is a systemic failure,
If we admit that could be us with a few bad breaks, it's too terrifying. So we distance ourselves. We judge.
and it allows us to view what is a national emergency as a personal failing.
Right. If a hurricane hit a city and left 500,000 people without homes, FEMA would be there in 24 hours. The National Guard would be setting up shelters.
It would be 24/7 news coverage.
But because homelessness is a slow-motion disaster, because it's chronic, we just accept it as part of the landscape.
And that leads us to the biggest contradiction in the entire source, the wealth paradox.
The shining city on the hill.
Yes, we're constantly told that we live in the wealthiest nation in the history of human civilization.
And yet we have veterans sleeping in shopping carts.
That specific point about veterans really seems to anger the author.
It should. The source highlights the betrayal there. You have men and women who served the state, who fought for this wealth.
And instead of sitting by a fire with their grandchildren.
They're deserted.
Yeah.
It really questions the legitimacy of the wealth we brag about. If you have the highest GDP, but your warriors are freezing in alleys, are you actually a successful society?
And the counter-argument is always, well, we just don't have the money to house everyone.
But the source brings the receipts. It puts the numbers side by side with the military budget.
And this is where the scale of the business model becomes just crystal clear.
The source notes that the U.S. is looking at a defense budget pushing $1 trillion.
It's a trillion, with a T. It's a number so big the human brain can't really comprehend it.
To contextualize it, the source reminds us that the U.S. spends more on its military than the next 9 countries combined.
We're over-indexed on defense to an absurd degree.
So the money exists. It's physically there in the Treasury.
It's just being spent on aircraft carriers instead of apartments.
That is the core argument. The source proposes a hypothetical. What if we cut that budget in half for just 1 year?
Take $500 billion.
$500 billion. And ring-fence it exclusively for eradicating homelessness.
I mean, think about what you could build. You're not just buying tarps with that. You are building permanent supportive housing. You're funding mental health clinics in every major city. You're practically rebuilding the social infrastructure.
The source argues it would be more than enough to solve the problem. Or at least it would be a great start to restoring the nation's moral compass.
But it doesn't happen.
And the source says it doesn't happen because of corruption. But it flips the script on what we think of as corruption.
Right. Usually we think of foreign dictators stealing aid money.
Exactly. The source mentions the U.S. president deriding countries like Somalia or Haiti, criticizing their corruption. The source calls this out as supreme hypocrisy.
It says the U.S. has its own deep systemic corruption. It's just cleaner.
It wears a suit. It's the consultations.
The money allocated for the homeless gets consumed by the administrative state.
Right. In those other countries, maybe a warlord takes the money. In the U.S., it goes to consultants to study the problem. It goes to overhead. It goes to salaries for directors of nonprofits that don't actually house anyone.
It's like a plumbing system designed to leak. The tax dollars go in the top, but 90% of it leaks out into the pockets of the managers before a single drop reaches the person on the street.
And if that's the system, then the corruption is legal, it's structural. And it explains why we can spend billions and see zero results. The money isn't vanishing, it's being absorbed.
Why the industry?
By the industry itself.
So on top of all that, we have the Band-Aid culture. The source talks about the actual aid that does reach the street.
The expired food banks.
Yeah, that detail was gross, but so telling. The idea that food banks often stock food that is expired or just about to expire.
It sends a message, right? You don't deserve fresh food. You get the scraps, the leftovers.
The source argues this is part of the dehumanization. Even when we help, we do it in a way that reinforces the hierarchy.
And the winter relief programs. The annual ritual of handing out tarps and coats.
It's performative.
It's totally performative. Handing someone a tarp when they're sleeping on concrete isn't the solution. It's just maintenance.
It's making homelessness slightly more survivable for one more night, so the person is still there tomorrow.
And it allows the giver to feel benevolent without actually changing the recipient's status.
The source mentions looking at their local shelters. Lines out the door.
Beyond capacity. This system is overwhelmed. The source notes that despite all this money, the local reality is that there are no beds. The solution is to turn people away or give them a blanket.
A complete failure of the service model.
Yeah.
So where does this leave us? I mean, the source concludes on a pretty heavy note.
It does. It suggests that none of this is an accident.
The systems currently in place, the nonprofits, the government programs, the economic pressure, they're all working exactly as intended.
They're efficient at sustaining themselves. They're profitable.
A profitable crisis.
And a necessary warning sign.
So the source leaves us with this final thought about morality versus finance. It asks, if we have the resources to rebuild militaries, if we have the time to police the world, but we still have citizens freezing under blankets in 40-degree weather, is the failure financial?
And clearly, the source believes the answer is no.
Right.
It's not a math problem. The money is there.
It's a moral choice.
It's a moral choice. We have chosen, as a society, to prioritize the military-industrial complex and the maintenance of a terrified workforce over basic human dignity.
It really forces you to look at that person in the alley differently on your way home today.
Not as a failure of the individual.
But as a failure of us, and perhaps, as the source suggests, as a deliberate feature of our economy. I want to leave you with the question the source ultimately poses, the one that's going to stick with me. When you see that person on the street sleeping in a doorway, are you looking at a tragedy that slipped through the cracks?
Or are you looking at a warning sign that was put there to keep you in line?
It's a disturbing thought, but one we need to sit with.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
Thank you.